Welcome to Jazz Time. JazzTime.com is an online store that buys, sells, trades authentic luxury watches. We make these videos so our customers can easily choose the best watch for themselves in the comfort of their own home. If you like this watch and would like to purchase it at the lowest price anywhere online, click on the link in the description below to buy it at JazzTime.com. Today, I'm going to be reviewing a custom Rolex GMT-Master II reference 16710, but made to look like a 1675 Blueberry with a patina dial and a faded blue bezel. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the history of the GMT, then talk to you about where this watch stands in the lineup of overall other GMTs, and then talk to you about the case, bezel, dial, bracelet movement, finally try it on and give you my thoughts. Oh, and I'm going to show you how we built this watch. So let's start with a little bit about the history. The GMT is one of Rolex's most iconic professional line watches. Rolex makes many different kind of watches. You can break them down in basically two categories: a dress watch, which is the Datejust or the day date president, or the sports watches, as Rolex calls them, the professional line. And this falls under the professional line. Of the professional line or the sports line, Rolex comes up with many different models. The GMT is one of them, and arguably one of the most iconic and recognizable watches that Rolex makes. And they came up with the GMT very long time ago. In fact, it was in the 1950s. So now that we're in the 2020s, 2024 actually, it's been more than 70 years or something around there. So that's a long time for a watch to have been around. And it more or less looks the same as it always has, with small changes here and there, a lot of changes just to make it look more modern, but the basic look has stayed the same. Okay, and there's tons of information on how those changes have occurred. I'm not going to get into those, but basically it's gone from what it was more or less 70 years ago to what it is now. But we've recreated what it used to look like in what you see here, using a modern or more modern Rolex, which has its benefits, and I'll get to it when we talk about each individual part. Okay, so that's and why was the GMT made? Well, the GMT is supposed to be for Pan Am Airlines. Pan Am Airlines was an airline that existed back in the 1950s, and it ran for some time. It eventually either went out of business or was bought out. I'm not really sure which one. But the airline approached Rolex about making or devising a watch that could allow the pilots to tell time in two different time zones, which makes sense. If you're a pilot, you might want to tell the time zone in, for example, California, where we are, and if you're flying to Australia, you might want to know what the time is there. So they asked Rolex to develop a watch, and Rolex obliged, which came the GMT. Okay, and since then it's gone on to do many things. Okay, all right, so that's a little bit about the history, the origins. Okay, I know there's a lot more, but this is not a history lesson. This is a review for this watch. So let's move on to where the watch stands in the lineup of other GMTs. Now, the watch that we chose to use as the base model for this is a reference 16710, which was produced approximately from the early 90s all the way until around 2010 was the last time they produced it, or even 2008, something like that. So it had a good almost 20-year run, 15 to 20-year run. And this was the last time in this five-digit reference number, 16710, that's 5 digits. It's the last time that they went with this sort of vintage look, which means that when I talk about each part, like the bracelet and the case and the way the bezel is, they used an aluminum bezel. They used a kind of hollow bracelet. It wasn't these solid links that they are now, and it uses this old school clasp that they've been using. I'll get to it later. And the entire watch still looked a little bit vintage, and it was the last time that it demarcates the last time that the watch, Rolex still made sports watch that looked vintage. And everything after, in the 6-digit reference, after 2010, actually they released the new GMT in 2006, so I had to, but they were still phasing out the old ones, so you could still actually buy the old ones for some time. They were over, there was like an overlap. So the modern Rolex came about in 2006, and it came out in the GMT first, actually. So those ones were not a good candidate because we wanted to make this watch look like a vintage GMT, which is why we chose the 16710. And I think it's a great choice because the problem is when you get too old, then the watch starts to feel flimsy. The bracelet is not very tight. Things start falling apart. The movement's not as tight. So I don't think it's best to use that. Okay, so we chose the 16710, and what we tried to make the watch look like is what some people call it a blueberry. Now, before the 16710, there was another model number called the 1675, and that reference has been around for a really long time. I want to say like 20 years or something. So maybe around late 60s, something like that, or I think it was in 1959 it was released. Okay, call it 1960, and all the way until like 1980. So that was quite a long time. It was 20 years actually. And the first GMT was produced in the mid 50s. So 1959 is close enough. It looks like one of the first GMTs. Okay, so we're trying to make the watch look like one of the 1950s watches, the original GMTs. And the way that we did it is like what you see here. But we did it with a base model of a watch from 2010, around 2010 or 2008, something like that. Okay, so that's a little bit about where this watch stands on the lineup. Okay, now let's go on to the case. Now, and we'll talk about each individual piece, and I'll show you how we changed it to make it look like an older vintage blueberry. Okay, and I might also add that since we're talking about this section here, the GMT typically came in 3 bezel variations. The most famous is the Pepsi bezel. It's blue on top, red on bottom. Blue means nighttime, red means daytime, and people call it the Pepsi because well, it has red and blue colors. Okay, and that's the most famous. And then they also made a red and black bezel, and they also made an all black bezel. But some people didn't know that they also made a blue bezel, and that's what you see here. It's the rarest of them all. They made a very short run of them, and that's what you see here, the blue bezel. Okay, and then it's kind of called the blueberry. So that we tried to recreate that. Okay, now let's go ahead and start talking about the case. Now the case is 40 millimeters, and it uses the GMT case here. Now, why is this one a little bit look more vintage than a current GMT? Well, the current GMTs use a very thick, strong 904L steel polished case, and it just looks, and the lugs are much thicker and beefier. The old school ones, which is what you see here, have these very thin thinner lugs, and makes the watch look more streamlined. Actually, looks, if you ask me, it looks better. I like it. And well, it's 40 millimeters. They've always been 40 millimeters. So, and also, oh yeah, I guess I can also say this. The top of the lugs are satin finish, and the side of the lugs are high polished. That's actually not much change from the newer generation, but it does make the watch, what can I say? I think actually the case looks very similar to the new one, but it has thinner lugs, which I like. Okay, now let's move on to the bezel. Now this part is really cool. This bezel is a 24-hour graduated hour bezel that is bidirectional, and it allows you to, so when the hour hand, the 24-hour hand goes around 24 hours, you can look at the bezel to see what time it is. So for example, if it's at 8, if it's pointing at 8, that means 8 a.m. If it's pointing at 18, that means it's 6 p.m., wherever it is. That makes sense. Okay, so but in the old school, when they first came out with this, they made a bezel and then they put an aluminum insert. And they always did it that way for a very long time, since it was first released in in the 1950s, all the way until they changed to the ceramic bezel. And some people like the ceramic bezel because it is it's almost like shockproof, scratch-proof. It doesn't fade. But on the other hand, the problem is that it doesn't fade. Now people actually like the fade, and actually, you know what? We had to pay a lot of money to buy this bezel and make this bezel faded. You would think that it'd be cheaper if faded, but no, actually it costs a lot more money to be faded. So what we did, I'm going to show you the original bezel here. We take the bezel off. It's actually just an insert, and it would often get scratched, faded, and it would look older very fast. And Rolex didn't want that, so they created a ceramic bezel. But you know what? Some people actually like the aluminum bezel. They like the fact that the aluminum bezel gets scratched, gets faded. It looks, weathered over time, and there actually is a market for that, which is why we're doing what we're doing, recreating this older look, but just putting it in a more modern case so that the watch itself is more sturdy and better. Okay. All right. Now the bezel, as I said, this is what the original one looks like on here, and then this is what we did. We basically take off a bezel and we weather it. Can't tell you exactly how we do it because I don't do it. The watchmaker does it, and then you get this bezel here. Now you might just think, oh, I can just go on to wherever, eBay or something, and buy a blue bezel. No, you can't, because you could, but it's not going to look like this. Let me show you what that cheap bezel would look like. Okay, so that cheaper bezel would look like this, and it's not the right color. It doesn't have that weathered look, and to get it weathered is the whole point in making this vintage look, which we know how to do, which is why we're making this video, so that hopefully you'll see it, you'll like it, you want to buy it from Jazz Time. Okay, so that's the bezel. Okay, the next part of this is the dial. Now I want to explain to you why this dial is so cool, because we actually spent a long time creating it and working with a dial maker to create it as you see it. Now I want to point out the special things. Now here's the original dial. I want you to see this original dial, and what you see on it is that it looks very similar, and at first you might not even be able to tell, but if you look closely, you'll see that the original dial looks different. It looks modern, very modern, because it is an original dial that came with this watch. So first things that you'll notice is that on the hour markers you have these white gold tracks, or like plots, I guess that's what you call them. So you have a white gold plot, and then you have the lume inside it. That's a really nice way. That's how they do it modern now. But back in the day when the watch was first released, they would take the lume and they would dot it on those hour markers, and they would not put any plots or these white gold plots on it. And that's just how they did it back then. And then they would print on the dial. Okay, and then usually it was actually called now it's called the GMT-Master II. Back then it was called the GMT-Master. They had a Master and then a Master II. I'm not exactly sure why. I think when they changed the movement to improve upon it, then they called it Master II, something like that. But anyways, so what we do when we take this dial is, and you'll also notice that the original dial is blacker. This one looks a little bit more faded. So what we do is we take an original dial, yes, an actual dial, from the same model. We wipe it completely. We add back the black base, get it in a matte finish instead of this shinier look, right? Matte finish, and then weather it so that it looks a little bit faded, and then add the patina hour markers. But not only do we add them, because normally when you add those hour markers, they're white and they luminous. But we don't want that. We want the hour markers to look weathered. So we actually dye the lume before we put it on, so that the lume will look weathered already, because we don't want to wait 20 years for it to look yellow. We want it to look yellow right now. So that's why we dye it, make it look like that. So then when you put it on, boom, it's already looks like it's aged 20 years or something, or 30 years, 40 years. Okay, and then we put the original same way the font, we put it back on just like it was on the old 1675s. And then if we just did that and we left the hands, you'd actually have white hands and yellow hour markers, which would not match. The watch would look, it would just wouldn't match. So we want to pay attention to details. So what we do is we take the hands and then we dye them to make them look just like the hour markers. It's actually genius, right? So you can make it look, the entire dial look like one piece, and the result is what you see in front of you. So that's really, you know, what we offer here at Jazz Time. Okay, so that's the dial. All right, now let's talk about the bracelet. And the bracelet is your standard Oyster bracelet. They make the GMT on a Jubilee or an Oyster. What you see here is an Oyster. And I was saying earlier, why did we choose to use a reference 16710? And that's because it has, you know, the most important part of the watch is the head, usually the dial. So the head is what you look at all the time. So that's the most important. But what people like is a strong bracelet, one that feels sturdy. You know, it doesn't have a lot of stretch to it, but it still has a little bit of a vintage vibe. So that's why we chose this one. If you choose an older one, the bracelets get very loose. They don't look very nice anymore. So that's why we don't choose those ones. Now, if you want to choose a really old one, like a real 1675 or something else very old, we could do it. But it's just from our experience, it's better to use this 5-digit reference, which is why we did it. Okay, all right, so that is the bracelet. Now the movement, that's another reason actually why you should use this as a starting base watch, because the movement here is a 3185. Now I'm not going to go into all the details on it, but basically it's a very good movement. It was used for 20 years, from something like like 1990s or something, all the way until 2006. And after that, they changed to a 3186, and that was just very minor changes. That was used from 2006 until 2022. So that's what, 15 years. They used one caliber for 15 years. And then in 22, they changed it, I think, a 3286 or something like that, which is the current model. Okay, so but the 3185, which is what is in here, is a very good movement. So, you know, yeah. Okay, so that's the movement. Now, see, the other thing is, if you go with a much older watch, then you have an even older movement, which could come into service issues if it and it's not as you know, accurate, and it's just not as good. Okay, now let's go ahead and try this watch on my wrist. So I'm 6 foot tall, 200 pounds, and I have a 7.5 inch wrist. And as you can see, this watch looks really cool. And you can also, by the way, go to our website, jazztime.com, where you can buy this watch, or just by clicking on the link in the description below, you can buy it. And you can also see some pictures of this on our model. We have a model that puts this on the wrist, and we take some pictures of it and post it on the website, so you can click on it, so you can see how, like, what it might look like, you know, with some how it might look in the wild. Okay, but here you can see it on my wrist, and it looks really good. I really like this watch. I'm actually quite a fan of it, and I think it's just a great idea. You know, if you want to have this vintage look, but you don't want to wear the same watch that everybody else has. You kind of want to spice it up a little bit. You know, you can turn it into this vintage look, or obviously we can do it. Now, if you don't like the blueberry that you see here, we can also do the same thing with a Pepsi or a Coke bezel or all black bezel or whatever you want, you know. So, you know, that's something to think about if you want to do that. Now, I like the watch a lot. I've always been a fan of the GMT, and especially now with this upgrade, I'm going to call it, to make it look more vintage. I really like this watch. So I'm going to give it 2 thumbs up, and if you want to buy it, click on the link in the description below.
If you want to find out more about the watch you just saw in the video, you can just click below on Show More to see the full description. Then you can check the link next to model as seen in video, click on it, and you will get to the proper page where you can see all the details. If you're watching on a mobile phone, you have to click on the arrow down on the right hand side below the video to see the full description. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. If you would like to share this video with your friends, you can use the share button below and share it on any platform you like. If you have questions, constructive feedback, want to tell us about some mistakes or misspeaks, just write a comment below. If you want to see more videos like this, you should subscribe to our channel and visit our channel page where you can find all the videos. And if you're interested in a specific watch brand, you can check out our playlists. If you want to check the price for a watch or want to buy one, remember at jazztime.com you always get a steep discount, so you should check the prices with us. If you want to know the price for a specific watch, just go to Google, type in JazzTime, plus the brand, model and the details you're interested in, and Google will find the right page for you. Thank you for watching.